So, welcome back to the online classroom for another week of academic writing. This week, it was all about reviews. So, the material was simple and straightforward in nature, but the tasks set before you were quite difficult. And that's why your analysis of the material that was posted, which dealt with 2 reviews, is going to get you 2 points for your final pre-exam point total of your English review. So that's not something we normally do. We would normally talk about these in class, but given that we can't talk about that in live time right now, then that's a way of taking this seriously. So normally, if we were in class together, we would be handing out these reviews and discussing them piece by piece. We'd talk about the first paragraph, the next paragraph, the next paragraph, and so on. So we're going to do that. Well, you're doing that at home already, and it's Friday now, and this video will be posted by the end of the day, but I've already received many of your assignments, and hopefully by the time this video actually gets uploaded, I'll have all of your assignments because that's the time they're due. Right? They should be done before my commentary so that it's authentically yours. So how about my commentary? Well, my task this week with this video is more or less the same as yours was in written form, and that is to analyze and critique the 2 reviews posted. So one of those deals with a film called Taxi Driver, and the other is more of a literary analysis paper dealing with the novel Alice in Wonderland. So we're going to start with, I think, the more purely technical one, and that is Taxi Driver. So that is titled Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver. And I will say this right off the bat, that unless you're doing a purely thematic review in a form of like thematic analysis or literary analysis, like this other one regarding Alice in Wonderland, which are always contemporary, these types of reviews, then you would want to choose something that is contemporary. Now, Taxi Driver, while all art is, hopefully, or all great art is forever contemporary, your job is to review something that is contemporary or relatively contemporary. Now, Taxi Driver, it even says this in the description, was made in 1976. So for you, that would be off limits. But we'll use it as an example. You would want to choose something that's been out in the last year, for example. So here, the reviewer focuses on Taxi Driver, and we'll just simply start with the introduction. So what I'm looking for in the introduction is information about the basic nature of the film, who directed it, when it was produced, and if necessary, given that it was made a while ago, some information about what was going on in that time. This is not always relevant. It depends on the type of film it is. And then finally, of course, some logical building towards a thesis. So if I read through this, it says, we'll start at the beginning, Martin Scorsese's powerful film Taxi Driver is one that delves into serious moral, social, and political issues of its time, issues that are still highly relevant today. So that's fine, with the exception of powerful film, which I think is out of place in the first sentence. I would just go with film because powerful is already, in a way, making a judgmental statement that you would want to say for your thesis. Other than that, we're doing okay. Made in 1976, it surfaced at a time in American history during which there was much social and political unrest, with divisions of thought on the aftermath of the Vietnam War, political chaos resulting from our growing distrust of the government after the Watergate scandal, and the increasing crime rates in our cities. This is fine. This is information about the background, not only of when the film was made, but also what's going on in the film itself. And then we get a little bit more information that turns it from general society towards more specific information about the character and its setting, or the character and his setting in the film. It says, because many veterans returning from combat duty in Vietnam had serious difficulties coping with normal life, Paul Schrader's script for Taxi Driver embodies our nation's frustration, rage, and confusion in the character of Travis Bickle, a troubled young ex-Marine. And so now I basically know what's going on. I know when the film was made. I know what it's about, essentially. It's a singular character who's an ex-vet in a troubled American landscape in the 1970s. So now I just need a statement. Like, what do they want to say about this film? So what is the film intending to do? Does it succeed, and why and how? So the rest of the introductory paragraph is the thesis. It's a really long thesis. So I'll read it, and then we'll see, does it accomplish what it should? The film portrays one man's lonely struggle for some form of identity and human dignity, as well as some understanding of his place in the world as an individual in this confusing urban environment, and succeeds through Robert De Niro's excellent portrayal of Travis, as he imparts meaning and significance to the character in several ways, through Scorsese's use of voiceover narration, by which Bickle's struggle to make sense of his world is made more impactful, and through the use of ambient sound, music, and powerful visual elements to capture the sordid atmosphere of this trial. So, quick commentary, yes, this works, right? Basically, this film succeeds, and I already have the thesis map. So I know it succeeds because of Robert De Niro's portrayal, the use of voice-over narration, which is a directorial choice, but executed by De Niro, the use of ambient sound and music, and powerful visual elements. So there we have 4 topic paragraphs that I expect to find. The thesis is a little bit wordy. There are interjections. Like, I don't think we need some form of identity and human dignity and some understanding of his place in the world. And the interjection is of excellent portrayal of Travis as he imparts meaning and significance to the character in several ways. We could do without some of that extra language, but mostly to accomplish its purpose, but it would be more acute if it was without some of that. So when we judge the introductory paragraph, it's good. You know, we know when the film was produced. We know the background of what was going on. We know what the film is going to follow. One man's struggle in this urban environment after coming back from World War and working as a taxi driver. And we know that the reviewer says the film succeeds. And why? So when I read this kind of thesis, then I'm expecting that to see the first topic mentioned, which is Robert De Niro's excellent portrayal of Travis. So that's what I'm expecting to be the first topic paragraph. Now, when I read the first sentence of the first topic paragraph, I'm already a little bit worried, or a lot worried. It says, one of the most important elements in Taxi Driver is the characterization of the title character achieved through name typing, dialogue, and appearance. So then they go on to talk about rough language, the name Bickle, Travis, lapsing into poor grammar, stereotyping, violent thought processes. None of this is what was said to be the topic in the thesis. I'm expecting this to be Robert De Niro's excellent portrayal of Travis, and nothing offered in the first 3 quarters of this paragraph does that. It's all off topic. Even his appearance is... These are choices not by De Niro necessarily, or his delivery of Travis Bickle. These are all choices by costume designers, directors. The name has nothing to do with Robert De Niro's importance. The dialogue is written by a scriptwriter, and it has, while De Niro activates that dialogue, that's not commented on that way. This is script writing, appearance, which is costume design, and directorial choices and naming. So actually, they've gone off topic entirely until the last sentence. The last sentence of the paragraph says, De Niro's portrayal of his constant worried expression, his obvious nervousness, and his social ineptness completes the picture and proves De Niro a wise casting choice. He is completely believable in the role. That should be the beginning of the paragraph. And then the rest of the paragraph should use scenes and examples of his worriedness and his obvious nervousness and his how he's able to convey this social ineptness and his violent thought process. So how did De Niro do that? That's what the paragraph should be about, and it's almost entirely not about that. So this paragraph is a complete failure for the most part because it doesn't do what it says it's going to do in the thesis. And the only relevant statements are at the end. So the next paragraph, it starts better. It says, another element used in this film that adds strength to its theme or themes is voice over narration, the use of a human voice off screen that can have a variety of functions. Scorsese uses it to add a sense of authenticity and to tell the viewer what cannot satisfactorily be conveyed by cinematic means. So this is much more on point. Based on the thesis, it says that the film succeeds through Scorsese's use of voiceover narration. So this matches what we expect from the thesis. And now what I want to hear, or what I'm looking for, is some commentary about not only when this happens, but how this happens, and what kind of a result it creates. If we read through the rest of the paragraph, there's really nothing wrong with it. So it says, originating from Travis's reading of entries in his journal, the voice of narration in Taxi Driver gives clear insight into Bickle's innermost thoughts and feelings, insight that is essential to understanding the real forces that drive the action of the film. An excellent lead-in sentence to the overall purpose of this dialogue. Now we have to see when this happens and how. So it goes on, it says, Travel's sense of angst about his environment and his place in it, and his overwhelming desire for, quote, a real rain to come and wash all this scum off the streets are expressed only in voiceover. Good, and we have one example there. The soft, understated tone and unhurried rhythmic pace provide a chilling verbal essence to De Niro's narration, in ironic contrast to the anger and violence simmering inside the character. The sound of De Niro's voice, combined with the environmental noises of the city, enhances the dichotomy seen within the character of Bickle. The contrast between his calm, soft monotone and the chaotic, noisy, fast-paced streets helps to create another level of tension in the film. So, what can I say about this? Overall, it's actually a pretty decent paragraph. It actually gets the general part done quite well. What's missing here is the concrete evidence. We have that one scene where it mentions his desire for a real rain to come and wash all this scum off the streets, but we have no description of the environment. We have no description of the scum. We don't have examples of the anger and violence simmering. It says the sound of De Niro's voice combined with the environmental noises of the city enhances the dichotomy, but we don't have any individual scenes or examples of how that voice in this scene combines with this environment. So it succeeds in the general presentation of why this voiceover narration was used, but to be a very successful paragraph, it would need many more examples of, for example, what it states here. When was this narration used to achieve this? When this happens, when this voice narration is combined with this particular element, then you get this. So it covers the general but not the specific, and that's its main failure. Now, the next topic addresses music and sound. So it says, from the opening scene to the final scene, the background music also plays an important role. We're off to a good start. It is on point. We know the third point from the thesis is ambient sound and music. This is about music. It says the rhythmic drum beats in opposition to the melodic harp and orchestral sounds create a haunting cadence echoed throughout the film, evoking strong emotional responses. So that's a good general statement. The drum beats are pounding and heavy as opposed to the light melodic sounds of the orchestra. We get a little bit more about the contrast, but it's slightly repetitive. We can feel our hearts beating in time with these beats while we breathe a sigh of relief with the orchestral sounds. The use of the harp during the final shootout is especially effective against casting an eerie, surreal feeling over that portion of the film. So that's the end. So while it starts well, it's a really, really incomplete paragraph because it, again, lacks examples. The previous one was more successful because it more thoroughly talked about how the voice of narration specifically affected the film, but that was still lacking more concrete evidence. Here, we have only one scene mentioned. In that scene is not described almost at all. It basically just says there's a harp, there's a final shootout, and it casts a surreal feeling. Why? how. There's no description of the scene. There's no description of how the harp is playing against that. We have no examples of scenes where drum beats are used. We have no examples of scenes where orchestral sounds are being used. It's just one harp in one scene, and even that's incomplete. So while this leads in strongly, it kind of ends before it begins, and it would need a lot more material to become a complete paragraph. So let's go to the last one. Here it says, unusual visual images also contribute significantly to the overall effect of Taxi Driver, especially Scorsese's use of slow motion, unique camera angles, and color. And then we go on, slow motion, a technique often used to stretch the moment in order to intensify its emotional quality, is used in the final battle scene in the hallway. So if you actually read through the description, it's an excellent description of the final battle scene in the hallway. And in that description, you get everything you want. You get when slow motion is used and what's the effect. You get how unique camera angles are used and what's the effect. You get color that's used and you get what effect. The problem is it's just one scene. In the sentence states, unusual visual images also contribute significantly to the overall effect of Taxi Driver. Then if it's the overall effect, then you can't just present one scene. This one scene is presented excellently. It's just the only scene. So it's short, and one scene does not prove a film's success. One scene can be used as an example, but you need more examples to back it up. Otherwise, you don't prove your point. So if we go to the conclusion, which should start with a thesis, it says the skillful use of characterization, music and sound effects, voice-over narration, and unusual visual techniques helps to make Taxi Driver a striking and dynamic film. Through Martin Scorsese's masterful direction, Travis Bickle's poignant struggle for identity and human dignity becomes an unforgettable film experience. We have one major conflict here, which is, it says the skillful use of characterization. And in the first thesis, we had Robert De Niro's excellent portrayal of Travis. So the writer of this review needs to decide whether he wants to talk about characterization or whether he wants to talk about De Niro's portrayal. Right now, it's one in the thesis, and then one that's different in the repeat of the thesis in the concluding paragraph. So they need to change that. They do say music and sound effects in this, and there really aren't any sound effects that they mention. It's really just music. So I would delete that. But also, it's clear when you look at this review that this is a very short concluding paragraph. They basically have restatement of thesis, and they have their concluding sentence, and they're missing the middle. The middle of that conclusion should re-emphasize paragraph 1, re-emphasize paragraph 2, re-emphasize the findings of paragraph 3, and re-emphasize the purpose of paragraph 4, because they have 4 topic paragraphs, and then provide the concluding sentence. So it's missing the middle. It's just bookends. So overall, this is a seriously problematic review. It starts very well with its conclusion. It gets way off track in the first topic paragraph. It gets back on track in the second topic paragraph, but lacks enough concrete evidence. The same is true in the third topic paragraph about music, but it's even more lacking because there is not a single specific scene described very well. And in the final one, all the elements mentioned in the topic paragraph are justified and described very well. The problem is it's just one scene. So you notice that as I posted, this is about 2 pages. And if this author had, filled out his conclusion and provided, fixed his first topic paragraph and provided more scenes and concrete evidence to support his statements in the topic paragraphs, then it would already be probably around 4 pages, and it would be likely quite a successful review. He's chosen, or he or she, whoever the reviewer is, has chosen elements that work. They made clear choices that this film succeeds because of this, and this. They just didn't prove it with concrete evidence. So it's lacking evidence, even though some of its general statements are on point and set the writer up to succeed, the writer just doesn't succeed. With the one really large problem of the topic paragraph 1 not matching the thesis and going off point. So let's talk about the second one. This is food and drink as a powerful symbol in Alice in Wonderland. Now, I'll say this right off the bat. This is a paper submitted by a previous colleague, and it is a literary analysis paper. Now, you can write a literary analysis paper about any time. Because it is a review, but it's a review of thematic material. So while people don't write reviews of Romeo and Juliet or Macbeth and say, I think this is good or not anymore, history has proven after 500 years or so that Shakespeare is pretty good at writing plays, and those plays are some of his most famous, and therefore they're probably, some of the best. It's not always true, but generally true when you survive 500 years. So people don't write reviews about whether or not Macbeth is good anymore, or whether Romeo and Juliet are good anymore. But they do write about what's the meaning of things, or why, or what's the symbology of this character, or why do these, what is the effect of these particular images. So in that respect, literary analysis papers are always relevant and always contemporary. And so for me, it's not a problem that this writer is writing about Alice in Wonderland, because they're writing about it from a thematic, symbological review perspective. Now, this paper, the other thing I want to mention, is actually comes from a different class. It comes from a literature class that I teach in the 4th year, but it's relevant to our class because it shows us another way of approaching a review. And I think book reviews are particularly problematic or difficult to write about because you don't have as many elements to potentially talk about as you do in a film review or in a theater production review, where you have just a much larger scope and a wider array of material to review. In a book, it's the words and the words. So while those words can be subdivided into all kinds of things like setting and theme and characterization and plot and then, narration and, reliability of narrator and many other things, there still aren't as many things or elements as a film. So here, if you're going to write about a book, is an option that is always possible, because there are always new perspectives on literature, even literature as ancient as it gets. So here, it's about Alice in Wonderland, and this is a well-known book, and clearly this is not a review of, was Alice in Wonderland a good book? It's food and drink as a powerful symbol in this book. So it's taking on one particular issue and what's its purpose in this particular book. Now, here I will say right off the bat, this is a more successful paper than than the one about Taxi Driver. It's actually quite a good paper. I would say it falls a little bit short of being excellent, but it generally accomplishes its purpose. So in the introduction, you have some lead-in language like food and drink are essential means of survival and existence. And then we get to literature. However, when it comes to literature, they are often presented as different symbols, which can carry hidden meanings. Eating rituals represent fundamentals of understanding a given society. This could relate to a certain period, political and social situation of a country. So we're clearly leading in. We go from food to food and literature, to food reflecting society, to food potentially reflecting political and social classes, and then on to age groups, and involving like children, and that all leads to the thesis statement of food and drink are used in Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland as a literary device for several purposes: to explain the social situation in England during the Victorian era, as a symbol of childish curiosity and temptation, as a symbol of growing up and understanding strange rules in the alternative world of the Wonderland. So it works. This is about how food and drink is used in these 3 particular ways in this particular book. Now they just have to defend that. So one might be suspicious right off that, wait a second, if the author is going to write about this, they have to not only have read Alice in Wonderland, but they also have to be aware of the political and social climate of Victorian era England. In this particular class, which is this paper is taken from English language, literature, poetry, and prose in the 19th century, it's a mandatory element of the class to learn not only the literature, but also the political and social background of that literature. So the students knew this and thus would not need sources to legitimize their knowledge. They should know that stuff. So the lack of sources in those particular elements is not a problem. Students are expected to know that. So I'm not worried about plagiarism in that respect. So what I would generally say is that, for the most part, the first topic paragraph, where it says Lewis Carroll uses food and drink as symbols in order to describe the hunger of the lower classes in the Victorian era, is a pretty strong paragraph. We get a bit of information about that exact situation, which we need. It's a bit of background information. We get a direct quote: the rich want liberty, the poor want ham and eggs. And they go on to say the author uses irony to describe the situation. They give an example: Alice eats most of the time when she is not hungry at all. What is more, she eats cakes, mushrooms, or drinks, strange potions, which are not available to all social classes. It is not the bread she eats, but the kind of food that lower classes could only dreamt of. There is plenty of food in Wonderland. It is often unhealthy. A piece of cake is not a type of food which is fundamental for one's survival. Then, so we have exact foods. These are concrete pieces of evidence. And then you have, in what they represent in Victorian society as well as in the book, I think there could be some added description here. It could have stretched out some of those examples, but they work. Then we use, for example, the beginning of the book, while Alice was falling down the hole, she saw a jar of orange marmalade, but unfortunately it was empty. At first she was happy, but her joy turned into disappointment when she discovered there was nothing in there. Then we have the playing with dog, and that there was not a thing to eat. We have the comment, the empty jar of marmalade, and the question what to eat could also help us understand the hard situation of the poor. And then we come back full circle. Alice's hunger is a symbol of the food shortage in this era, as well as the plenty of the rich. The lower classes did not ask for something special or expensive. Their main goal is not to starve for hunger. They wanted to earn money in order to provide enough food for the family. By using food and drink as a means of survival, Carroll illustrated the food crisis in the Victorian era both literally and ironically. Then it comes full circle. I think that overall is quite a successful paragraph. We have concrete examples of scenes involving the marmalade, involving the dog. We have particular items named like mushrooms and cakes and potions. I would have liked more description of those, but they serve a purpose. I also think there's a missed opportunity. I think the sentence, at first she was very happy, but her joy turned into disappointment when she discovered that there was nothing in there, doesn't get enough commentary. I think there's room here to interject with commentary, and that there's commentary missing. So for me, without commentary there, it's a problem. But that's the only, let's say, larger than small problem in this paragraph. Why was the orange marmalade empty? Was that a representation of the emptiness of the diet of the upper classes, of the lack of access to that type of food, let alone other types of food in the lower classes? So this is generally a good paragraph, but there are a few missed opportunities. I think that the second paragraph is slightly less successful than the other two paragraphs. Here it says food and drink also serve as symbols of childish curiosity and temptation. And while there are quite a few examples used in this, we have the drink me potion, we have the eat me scene, we have the unlabeled bottle. So I think actually this paragraph does present the childish curiosity element quite strongly. What it fails to address is kind of the purpose of it. Like some of the questions I have is like, what's the point? Like, okay, yes, food and symbol are used as presentations of childish curiosity, but what's the point behind that? If in the first part of this is reflective of Victorian society, then this seems like a little bit of a weaker point. As well, it seemed for me, for the most part, while the first three examples all show Alice as a child having interactions with food, and it's showing basically or reflective of childish curiosity. Like children, when presented with things, will, out of curiosity, try them, which is very different than an adult perspective where they might say, what are the benefits or consequences of this? What this paragraph fails to address is that this only works at the beginning of this novel. And already in the next paragraph, it says one of the major roles of food and drink is to help the main character adapt to weird rules in Wonderland, and thereby also serve as a vehicle for Alice's physical and mental transformation in transition between childhood and adulthood. So what the major weakness of this is, while there are good examples, is that the reviewer fails to mention that this only occurs at the beginning of the book before Alice begins her transformation. Because if you don't mention it, you have a bit of a contradiction. So this childish curiosity does eventually change, so you have to set this paragraph at the beginning of the book, and this author fails to do that. Also, it's a missed opportunity for me to talk about curiosity of a child versus adult perspective, because here, if children do this and they're curious, then you have to have a contrast of others who don't. So for me, it's a missed opportunity here to compare children with adults, especially in the Victorian world, and to describe, and there's a lack of commentary about the benefits or the advantages as well as the disadvantages of this childish curiosity. You're basically just saying, this happens in the book, and it's a little bit weak and it's lacking a bit of commentary. That said, there are quality scenes chosen, and they serve as good examples of this childish curiosity, but they're all chosen from the beginning of the book, in which case you have to locate it at the beginning of the book. I think that the final paragraph here is perhaps the strongest of the three. It states at the beginning that these food and drink, here, I'll read it. One of the major roles of food and drink is to help the main character adapt to weird rules in Wonderland, and thereby also serve as a vehicle for Alice's physical and mental transformation. So here they mention cookies, mushrooms, and little bottles, and that they facilitate her journey from childhood to adulthood, and that the world of Wonderland required much adaptability. These are good lead-in points, but now we need examples. So we get those examples and presented in a way that shows us her different reactions and how they are more mature, more balanced. Like if they start with childish curiosity, then they lead towards more, calculated prediction or guesswork of what might happen, and some logical processes that are more adult-like. And then in the end, culminating in her dismissal of the entire thing as nonsense, which is a very adult perspective. So we need examples of scenes to do that, and that's exactly what we have. We have the eating in the small room, which begins the process. We have the potion and cookie trying, which was just curiosity. But then we have the caterpillar with the special mushroom and how she manages that situation. We have the attempting to understand the rules of the Wonderland, and her waking up and learning from this experimentation that more or less it's nonsense, and that eating and drinking has helped her every time to learn a new lesson. I think there's a little bit of a missed opportunity to talk about some scenes after the caterpillar where she continues to experiment, but there is at least a scene for each phase. One for childish curiosity, one for more calculated and kind of, let's say, pubescent development, and then another one reflective of a more adult perspective. So let's go to the conclusion. Here we have the first sentence. Food and drink are powerful symbols in this novel and could be interpreted in several different ways. This is a pretty weak reiteration of the thesis. This could be interpreted in several different ways, should just be eliminated entirely, because this paper is clearly interpreting them in particular ways. So you should cut that sentence out. It should just say, food and drink are powerful symbols in this novel, which Lewis Carroll used to describe the hard situation in England during the Victorian era. So the rest of it works, though. It follows the pattern. Childish curiosity, sentence, development, sentence, and fundamental means of existence. So you have a poor reiteration of the thesis, but you have the main topics: the Victorian era, the childish curiosity, the development, and then you have pretty good closing language. Here, these symbols carry hidden meanings. By using them, the author revealed the true situation of the lower classes in the Victorian era, how childish curiosity prevails in almost every situation at the period of growing up and becoming an adult is not simple at all. So I think it closes pretty well because it takes it a bit away from the book itself, but it doesn't go into new territory. It's basically this, food and drink are used like this in this book, and this book is a reflection of development and a way of looking at society overall. So it closes quite well. And the last page is, which I don't have in front of me, or maybe I do. The final page posted was actually a bibliography or works cited page. That's not necessary for a review, but it will be necessary for a research paper. So we will be going into research papers next week, and research papers will occupy us for the rest of the semester. There are many different aspects of research papers, and we want to practice those aspects. So there'll be quite a bit of practice work issued to you, but first a discussion of those elements. So in a way, that final page of the Alice in Wonderland paper that was posted is kind of a preview of what's coming, and that is, you do need to support your statements by finding evidence, and that evidence is not the book as it is in review or the film as it is in review, but outside sources. So that's where we'll pick up next week. In the meantime, stay socially distanced. Academic writing is perhaps the best class to say for staying socially distanced, especially when we get into writing your papers. So in a way, this is a good practice for that as well. I look forward to reading your commentary as it gets turned in, and I'll be posting new material on Monday for us to get started with next week. Good luck. Enjoy the weekend, even if you have to stay inside on Sunday, and goodbye.